Good everybody, my name is Karsten Kroening, back at it again with another YouTube video. Today we are going over my pickups and favorites. This is a series of videos that I've been doing for a very long time where I go over the clothes I've been consuming, books, movies, TV shows I've been consuming, and of course the music I've been consuming. It's just me kind of compiling the things in my life that I've consumed, found interesting, and now I want to share with you. And not like in some like hyper consumption way, just like these are the things that I truly find fulfilling, have sat with, and think that I want to anti-gatekeep and share with you. But anyways, let's just get right into it. I want to show you some of the clothes, and I want to start with this one. This is a piece from Rick Owens, Fall Winter 15, Sphinx. This is a denim trucker jacket with like a wax or oil stain on it. Rick Owens over the last few years has really gotten to sort of represent this vamp culture, hyper consumption, glamorous. And it's very funny because even though this jacket is Rick Owens, it's black, I feel like it's very much the antithesis of that. In that this jacket is just so unassuming with how detailed and well thought out it is. There was this era of Rick Owens' work where he was very interested in perfecting everyday items such as a denim jacket, a leather jacket, jeans, where it just fits absolutely perfectly. Everything from the shoulders to the length of the sleeve, to the way that the collar is shaped and structured, give this jacket a very dynamic and perfect feel. The homie at From Full Court was able to get this to me as pieces from this era have become more and more coveted as sort of Rick has gone away from this design philosophy. All right, so the next piece is one I actually made for my own brand. If you don't know, I have my own brand. It's called Karsten Kroening, namesake label. But it is this piece right here, and this is called the Chimera bag. The bag that is composed of this black pony hair, this hair-on cow skin, and then this super soft calfed leather, which is the handles and all the details of it. This bag took a long time to make because all of the materials are super premium. I have wanted to work with this black pony hair material for a very long time. I've seen Rick Owens, Andy Millimeter, Guidi, Boris Bajan-Saberi, all these designers use it, and I think it's just an amazing motif. I think it looks great. The name of the bag is called Chimera because in mythology, a chimera was sort of a hybrid animal, one animal that was made out of multiple. The original chimera was the lion, goat, snake hybrid, but a chimera can denote any hybrid animal. So since this bag is multiple animals put into one, we have called it the Chimera bag. And I'm sort of just fascinated by like animal fur or leather, that sort of thing. Like if you're to go around my house, you would find that I have a lot of different animal pelts and animal furs. I have antlers and horns as decorations. Using an animal remains in a very tasteful, noble way, I think is something that really honors the animal through its death. I think instead of discarding the animal remains and using them for something, really honors them. I think the relationship with clothing is even more sacred. Because when you think about it, the first clothing were animal pelts, animal furs. An animal has been sort of useful to the ecosystem even past its death, becoming shelter or clothing for the first people. So I think using leather, fur, or whatever is really sacred. I think it honors the animal. I think it gives it sort of a noble death and purpose after death. When it comes to the concept of the chimera has always sort of existed in stories, in mythology. But all the way back to Roman times, people have tried to recreate chimeras using the carcasses of dead animals and taxidermy. The earliest example of this you can find in Pliny the Elder's account, where he describes how someone took part human and part horse and taxidermied them in this honey to preserve it to make a chimera centaur. More contemporary examples of this are like a jackalope or like the Fiji mermaid. And I think these sort of attempts to create a chimera, bring it from mythology to the physical world, are very blasphemous maybe and profane, because I think a big part about using sort of animal remains is that you need to be tasteful, conscious to honor the animal. And so when you look at a lot of the examples of physical chimeras and taxidermy, I think they're very like profane, just don't honor the animal. And so sort of the challenge with this bag that kind of came was, how do we create a physical chimera that is not blasphemous, but instead honors the animal, has utility, has purpose, but is also tasteful, and then also sort of creates this physical embodiment of the mythologized Chimera. And so yeah, this bag was the result of that weird thought experiment. So that's why it's called the Chimera bag. Like I said, because it uses premium materials, this item will be a little bit more expensive. We made this bag to be pretty big, so it could be somewhat practical. Even though it's made out of these very luxurious, expensive materials, we designed it so you could still use it in your day-to-day life. So you could fit groceries in there, so you could put your laundry in there, so you could put items you would need to travel in there, and this would still be useful. You wouldn't just be sinking all this money away to get a bag that doesn't actually work and can't actually hold anything. If you're interested in this bag, possibly picking it up or just knowing when it will be dropping, you can always follow my Instagram down below, Karsten Kroening. Next, I want to talk about a shoe I got recently, and these are the Salomon Quests. Salomon Quests I came across because they are very, very similar to the Salomon Boris collab hiking boot. Pretty sure the silhouette is practically the same with some minor details changed. Biggest difference though, of course, being is that the Boris Salomon collab have these beautiful dye treatment, whereas these are just one solid color. I was going to just buy the Boris ones, but I actually fell in love with this color a little bit more. And these are this beautiful, like, sort of chocolate plum. It's this deep, deep earthy brown with this reddish tone or hue to it. But they're just such a super beautiful, natural, rich color. So anyway, super happy to get these from Salomon. I also recently got some vintage t-shirts or band t-shirts I wanted to show you guys. The first one being this vintage Big Black t-shirt. If you're not familiar with the band Big Black, they were an industrial noise rock band from the 80s that I've always been a very big fan of. In some of my earlier videos, you can see that I picked up a lot of different shirts from either Big Black or Shellac, the band that Steve Albini, who fronted Big Black, started afterwards. Unfortunately, recently Steve Albini passed away. I happened to find this shirt in a warehouse sale just a few days before he actually passed away, which is kind of strange moment. This one is admittedly a little bit slim on me, but it's just a cool reminder of one of my favorite bands. In the same spirit, I also picked up another industrial noise rock band shirt, and this one from Godflesh. Godflesh has been one of my favorite bands this year. Very similar to Big Black in a sense, where they have a drum machine and no real drummer, and it's just guys ripping on guitar and bass. Whereas though Godflesh is a lot more in the sort of sludge rock category, or maybe doom metal or something like that, where Big Black is much noisier, high-pitched, tingy guitars. Godflesh is just a super cool band. The lead singer of it, Justin Broderick, also has a lot of other super cool projects like Heisu, which is a shoegaze band. And then he also has a bunch of electronic, noisy, industrial projects as well. Just a super cool guy, and this is a super cool band, so I was happy to get this vintage shirt from, I believe, the late 90s, early 2000s. The last band shirt that I have is from Agriculture. Now this one is not actually vintage, so they're a newer band, but I actually bought this band shirt from their show last year when I saw them. I just wear it all the time. Agriculture is a super cool black metal band. I was able to see them live when they opened for Chat Pile. But yeah, I really like this shirt. I think it's super well designed and cool looking, so I'm super happy to have this. Next pickups are from the brand Troubled Waters. Now, if you're not familiar with Troubled Waters, they're a brand started by the homie Polo. He has an amazing YouTube, go check it out. They recently did a pop-up in New York at the space Commune, which Commune is another really, really cool boutique or retailer that just opened in New York. I ended up getting 2 pairs of denim from Troubled Waters. One are these more straight-legged, which have this raw, unfinished hem that's been opened up. They have this really cool wash that's sort of like sandblasted. The others are this pair of slightly wider denim that have a little bit less distressing on them, but still look very, very worn in. And they have obviously a much more flared, sort of wider fit to them. These ones have slightly more of an unconventional pattern, as sort of they have these circular line seams that go around them. I was really lucky to be able to go to New York Fashion Week this year, as one of my best friends from high school, Ezra, actually was presenting his collection there. Me and my other friend, Tommy Pointer, went out to New York Fashion Week because he was presenting his collection. We helped him set up, and then we all got to attend the show as well. Super cool moment for me, Tommy, and Ezra to see Ezra, who we had known since we were 16, now years later presenting at New York Fashion Week. Just again, super surreal to have 3 friends from high school in Minnesota all kind of end up in the fashion industry and working there, and now one of them having a collection. Moving on, one of the last outerwear pieces I have is this North Face camo, sort of lightweight down jacket. This one is a lighter down that's meant to be an underlayer. This jacket I ended up copying because I really liked the unique camo pattern on it. There's a lot of camo patterns that are somewhat in vogue right now, whether it's those ones that are on the shorts or like Realtree. Growing up in the Midwest and being sort of surrounded by prepper culture or hunter culture, you see a lot of other alternative camo designs that aren't as common. This is one of them. And it kind of fascinates me. A lot of these camos are developed for the military and kind of developed in the hope that the military will buy them or take them as a bid, and then they don't end up getting used, and so they go to the civilian market and sort of become the premium civilian camo you can buy. I actually took it to Alaska a little while ago, and it was perfect for that. I spent a lot of time in Alaska recently sort of formulating where I want my brand to go, what some of the next collections will look like. And I was actually also sort of testing out some of the clothes I've made to see how they kind of hold up in the wilderness. So when I wasn't ending up testing my own clothes, I was wearing this jacket. On sort of the subject of alternative camos, one of the pieces I was testing that I feel comfortable sharing at this point was this hat. This is a hat I made, and it uses an alternative camo called Kryptek. Now, like I was saying, Kryptek is one of these camos that was developed mainly for military use at first, though most of the mainstream military has not picked it up as a camo that's in common usage. So mainly it sits on the civilian market. Now, Kryptek specifically is a pretty new camo. I think it was developed in around 2010, and there's some pretty good data and research regarding it as sort of a superior camo. And I kind of became fascinated with Kryptek because when I grew up in Minnesota, sort of surrounded by, again, prepper culture, hunting culture, outdoorsman culture, Kryptek was regarded very highly as a premium camo. So I ended up finding a company that could license Kryptek to me, and I developed this hat. I'm not exactly sure when this hat will come out, but continuing sort of the theme of alternative camos, hunting culture, prepper culture, I bought this film. It is the only DVD I own. It is called Redoubt by Matthew Barney. The reason I bought it was because when I was sort of diving into this idea of alternative camos, this movie popped up when I was looking into one of the alternative camo brands that's super popular. Matthew Barney, who made this movie, is an avant-garde filmmaker. He's probably best known for, at one point, being Bjork's husband. He's known for making these very highly conceptual, strange, avant-garde films. And really what it is it's a retelling of the story of the goddess hunter Diana being on her sort of sacred hunt, and then a male intruder sort of messing up her hunting grounds. However, it is retold in the Catskill Mountains of northern Idaho. And sort of the two deeper meanings of it is that it also represents how wolves were reintroduced into northern Idaho, but also this cultural movement called Redoubt. And Redoubt is this cultural movement around preppers, which has sort of taken the Catskill Mountain region of northern Idaho by storm. This movement of people called Redoubters have really taken over this area and kind of claimed it for their own culturally. And so Matthew Barney, kind of reflecting on this, he himself being in Idaho, made this movie about this retelling of the goddess Diana, but also having this triple meaning about the wolves re-entering, as well as this population of preppers called Redoubters. All that to say is this movie is fascinating. The costume design is amazing. They use a lot of those alternative camos. But the reason I bought this movie is because it is not available on any streaming service. Matthew Barney gatekeeps his own films in the fact that you can really only watch them at a cinema or at a museum that's showing his films, or you have to buy them in these very special editions when they come out. This version I have here came out in 2022. I believe the film came out in the early 2020s, so it's not that old. Sort of to continue off with that, I've been reading a lot and I want to share some of the books I've read with you. Like I said, I've spent a lot of time in Alaska recently, as well as Ontario, Canada. Reason for that is just kind of get away from everything. I really enjoy being in the wilderness. I work remotely, so it's pretty easy for me to just go off and go fishing, is read a lot and reformulate how I think about my brand and my own artistic philosophy per se. So I've read a few books that have been super insightful to me and my own sort of philosophy around art. The first book I want to talk about is Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. Now, for a little bit of context, Carl Jung has always been an important thinker to me particularly. When I was around 15 years old, I had a teacher who introduced me to sort of the Jungian idea of the shared unconscious. Introduced me to the idea of how all mythology, religion, and things of that matter all sort of hinge on the psychological shared unconscious. A lot of my artistic interpretation and the reason I think art is important, and I guess my artistic lens or philosophy, comes from Jung's understanding that mythology and art are reflections of our shared unconscious, are able to reveal these deeper truths that are in our shared unconscious, that oftentimes the logical sides of us hide. And at the time, upon him kind of sharing that idea with me, it was super impactful, but he actually never told me to read Jung. He had me just kind of look it up on YouTube. And so now, years later, I realized I had never actually read Jung. I picked up Man and His Symbols. Jung's pretty much whole psychological approach was that we have the conscious and the unconscious. And our conscious is what we are aware of, our unconscious is what we are not aware of. And Jung believed that a lot of important truths valuable to self-actualization were hidden in the unconscious. And he believed that those truths kind of make their way out in, first and foremost, our dreams, then also in our mythology, our stories, our art. All of these things, dreams, mythology, art, all kind of take these truths that are hidden from us in something called the shared unconscious, which is something that we all have access to, our shared unconscious, that comes from our evolution. I find Jung very valuable because I think things like myth are fascinating and play a huge part in my own art, because I believe it to be sort of part of this deeper truth, this shared unconscious. But yeah, it's super fascinating. This has played a huge part in my artistic philosophy that I sort of impart on my own design as well as my interpretation. Then to take it a step deeper, another book I've read and got from Jung is this one, and this is called The Red Book. Now, Carl Jung was really fascinating because, like I said, he had all these ideas around the shared unconscious. He had a lot of ideas about philosophy, psychology, but what a lot of people don't know is that all of Jung's ideas pretty much came from his dreams. And so when Jung was a young man and he was studying under Freud, he would have these dramatic, terrifying, almost apocalyptic dreams quite often. And a lot of his psychological ideas came from these dreams. Now, after Jung died, he never really shared with people these dreams that he had and how they related to his own scientific practice. And he had wrote them all down in this book called The Red Book, which was sort of his dream journal, but it was also sort of his own Gnostic fantasy. On all of his dreams, he often had these beautiful, almost Nordic looking artistic depictions of these dreams. And then he also interpreted those dreams and showed how they sort of proved his science. So anyway, after Jung died, his family said, absolutely not, we cannot release this. All of his science will be disproven if people are aware that all of his ideas came from dreams. You also have to keep in mind during that time, Jungian psychology and the practice of psychology as a whole was very young, and no pun intended. But Carl Jung's ideas were also very new and groundbreaking because Freud was pretty much the only psychologist at the time who had any clout per se. So anyway, his family hid his Red Book for years until around 2010. And in 2010, a close friend of the Jungian estate, I believe it's this person right here who did the foreword, who I'm not going to try to butcher their name, but they convinced the Jungian estate to release the Red Book. And so when I was in Ontario, Canada, formulating a lot of the next few collections and the things that I will be designing, and sort of the overarching philosophy of that, I was reading the Red Book. And this is just sort of a small compact model. The actual Red Book was like 3 feet tall, I think, and featured, again, all these giant, immense illustrations of his like weirdly terrifying apocalyptic dreams. Another book that I've read, which outside of Jung has also been super, super influential to my own philosophy around design and art, is this one, and this is Friedrich Nietzsche, The Birth of Tragedy. And his definition of tragedy is it's a mix of the 2 styles of art. Of the first style of art, he kind of traces it back to the ancient Greeks, is the Apollyon, who is named after the goddess Apollo. And that style of art is like very highly intellectualized, it's very logical, there's discipline, clarity, rationality. It's very straightforward, oftentimes well thought out art. Then there's this other style of art, which is the Dionysian. That is of course named after the Greek god Dionysus. And that style of art is very raw, it's very human, it's very animalistic. If the Apollyon style of art is like symphony and opera, maybe the Dionysian is like rock and roll. The reason he uses the term Dionysian is because oftentimes the worshippers of Dionysus would have these sort of dances. But pretty much these 2 distinct styles of art, the Dionysian and the Apollyon, when they are separated, aren't as meaningful or really give society anything. But what Nietzsche believed is when these 2 forms of art and the best pieces of them are combined and put into one, you have tragedy, which is the best and most important form of art that is helpful to society. Sort of this perfect mix of the Apollyon and the Dionysian has been super influential for me for thinking of art, because it's this sort of contrast, this balance between rationalism and well-intended and well-thought-out art and pure like human absurdity. Nietzsche says like a perfect tragedy in his modern times was like opera, was like Wagner. And so I kind of think like similar like opera tragedies that I think are awesome, sort of like a Twin Peaks or like a Neon Genesis. Anyway, this book has been super, super interesting, super influential on, again, my design, the art I'm making. I have this copy of a manga, actually, and this is Seraphim 26613336 Wing, Mamoru Oshii and Satoshi Kon. One of these guys ended up creating Ghost in the Shell and Angel's Egg, and the other guy created Perfect Blue, Paprika. Before they made their hits, they both actually combined and worked together for one time only, and that was in Seraphim 266. This is a fascinating manga with a super fascinating story. The kind of kick in the gut is that the story was never finished. They had some artistic differences, decided to abandon the project. The imagery and sort of the ideas on it have been super influential on sort of the next clothes that I'm making. It's that some films that I have really loved. I have been on a Paul Schrader kick recently. I've talked about how First Reformed is a film that I really, really like. Since then, I've kind of gone down the Paul Schrader wormhole, and I have watched Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, Hardcore, and then also Taxi Driver. And to kind of start off, Taxi Driver is sort of the story of a young man who is sort of disenfranchised, and this leads to them sort of seeking out this heroic life, this sort of anti-hero thing. And so this taxi driver in sort of seedy New York City ends up going on like a rampage and like killing pimps pretty much. And it sort of is this exploration of this man who really wants to have this sort of heroic martyrdom and desire for this like almost noble violence. It's an interesting theme, interesting story. Now, Paul Schrader, after making that movie, wanted to dive similarly into that theme, but in a very different context. That's where you get Mishima, Life in 4 Chapters, which is really the same concept, but in a vastly different place. Instead of being in seedy New York in the 70s, it takes place in Japan with, instead of a disenfranchised man, it's a very wealthy man. It's a renowned author. It's Yukio Mishima, and it goes about the story of his life and how he also goes to the extreme and seeks out this noble violence. Whereas instead of him going to sort of kill criminals, he actually forms a militia around him, form a coup. They end up taking over a military base. But it's sort of the same similar story, sort of this person's struggle and really just kind of crashing out at the end of the day. Paul Schrader is like the master of making crash out films for dudes. And then continuing on with that, I watched Hardcore. This is about a man from Michigan who is a father, is very deeply involved in the Calvinist church. The first 40 minutes of this film are absolutely amazing as it sort of takes place in that world, and it just really immerses you in this sort of Midwest, deeply religious Calvinist world. His daughter actually gets trafficked into the adult film industry. It's deeply disturbing, but a great, great movie. And again, it's a crash out movie. This guy crashes out. And of course, I've talked about First Reformed again. Another great crash out movie, pretty much same as the other ones. It's just, Paul Schrader makes great movies about guys crashing out. But beyond that, that's just kind of what I've been doing. That's really all I have besides the music. Don't forget, I have this bag coming out soon. I'm gonna close you guys off with some music, but otherwise check me out on Instagram if you want to follow the brand, and subscribe if you haven't been into this before. And here are my music recommendations.